progress we're in. We've been through the tragedy and the trials and tribulation. There's a little bit more testing here in chapter 3. Ruth has one final test here. And then there's going to be that tension. What is Ruth's fate going to be? So, last week, I posed a question to you and asked you to think about it for a while. And so, why do you think Boaz was so kind to Ruth? Well, he almost seemed to have an attraction, almost a camaraderie or attraction. And why is that? Has anybody thought about it? I think there's a very, very good reason. In fact, I gave you a hint last week. Okay. Who was Boaz's mother? Very good.
Of Jericho.
What?
Rahab of Jericho.
Okay. And what was Rahab? So Boaz's mother is a Canaanite prostitute. So I think that Boaz may have been one of the only men in all of Judah who would even give Ruth a second look. Because they were supposed to stay separate from the Canaanites, especially Canaanite women, and not marry them. But Boaz's mother was a Canaanite prostitute. So I don't think he had a problem with Ruth at all. I see it's kind of the providence of God here. And not only that, but Rahab was a woman of great faith. You know, and her testimony is here in Joshua, and she talks about how she had heard about what God did for the Israelites and how they walked through the Red Sea and all, and the victories that God had given them, supernatural victories. And here's just her testimony. She says, "For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath." So Ruth was a woman of great faith. And she's even revered in Hebrews in the section in what we call the Hall of Faith. It says, "By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace." And she's even mentioned in James. It says, "In the same way, it was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way." So, a woman of great, great faith. So never, ever, ever underestimate the power of a mother of faith. So I think Rahab is a bigger reason why Boaz is the man that he is in this book. But I think it's kind of interesting in both of these, do they call it Rahab the harlot? You know, like, it's just, maybe that's just to distinguish her from any other Rahab. But, you know, I maybe think about when we get to heaven and we start introducing people, we're going to say, you get introduced to them, they go, "I'm James' brother John, and I'm John, the one who Jesus loved. I'm Rahab the harlot."
Well, my question is, when she came to faith, did she continue her line of work?
Well, she was married.
I mean,
She married this guy named Solomon, so I don't think so.
okay, it was just a handle that hung on.
Yeah.
By this time, they had the law, and also that was forbidden in the law. So,
Okay.
so I'm sure she got a real job or
A radical one.
a better job.
I think she's referred to as Rahab the harlot all throughout Scripture, just to show the power of redemption.
Yes, yes.
Great story of redemption, yeah. But a great faith. You know, you have to be impressed by her faith. So I'm sure she had a tremendous impact on Boaz. And so We start chapter 3, it says, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Okay, so what is this security all about? Well, we're going to explore that. We're going to do a little talk about God's financial plan for the Israelites. Now, I've been doing a lot of history and a lot of background and all, and are y'all finding that tedious at all, or are you finding it interesting? Well, good, then I have volunteers. So we're going to look at quite a bit more history. Some of you are going to have one on the back. Here, Roger, you're going to volunteer. Any other volunteer? I got Natty, I need a few more.
I'll take them.
3 more. One more. Okay. So, Naomi says, I need to seek security for you because she knew some things. She knew how it was supposed to work. So let's talk about that. So once again, God was interested in the poor. So who has Leviticus 25:35?
If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would a foreigner and a stranger, so they can continue to live among you. Do not take interest or any profit from them, but fear your God, so that they may continue to live among you. You must not lend them money at interest or sell them food at profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and sell themselves to you, do not make them work as slaves. They are to be treated as hired workers or temporary residents among you, and they are to work for you until the year of Jubilee. Then they and their children are to be released, and they will go back to their own lands and to the property of their ancestors. Because the Israelites are my servants, whom I brought out of Egypt, they must not be sold as slaves. Do not rule them as ruthless, but fear your God.
Okay. So God outlines some rules for the poor. They were to sustain them. If someone were to become poor, then it was the job of the Israelites to sustain their neighbors, lend them money if they had to, and they could not charge interest. They could for foreigners, but they couldn't for their fellow Israelites. Okay, but they were not ever to be treated as slaves. So God said, but they could have slaves. They could have slaves who were foreigners, but they could not have Israelite slaves. So there's this thing in Israel called the Shemitah. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Does anybody know how to pronounce it? But it's something that happened every 7 years, or was supposed to happen every 7 years. Okay? And who's got Deuteronomy?
At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release of debts. And this is the form of the release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not require it of his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. For a foreigner you may require it, but you shall give up your claim to what is owed by your brother, except when there may be no poor among you, for the Lord will greatly bless you in the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess as an inheritance. Only if you carefully obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe with care all these commandments which I command you today. For the Lord your God will bless you just as he promised you. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. You shall reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over you. If there is among you a poor man of your brethren within any of the gates of your land, which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he needs. Beware lest there be a wicked thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release is at hand, and your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to the Lord against you, and it become sin among you. You shall surely give him, and your heart should not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your works, and in all to which you put your hand. For the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor, your needy, in your land.
So, we see that God has promised to bless them greatly. We see that he said, if you obey me, I'll bless you greatly. And I expect you to bless others also. So if you have some, and he set up this system for every 7 years, and there's some other things, but every 7 years, all debts are forgiven. If you had lent, someone money, in the 7th year, it's erased. And he also told them, he said, now, be careful that if you have a brother in need and it's only a year or two till the Shemitah, you still lend him the money. He said, and don't say in your heart, well, I'm not going to, it's only a couple of years, and he's not going to have time to pay me back. So God is saying, I bless you, I want you to bless them. Okay, how about Deuteronomy? And also he said, he made a statement there, he said, the poor will always be in the land, right? Anybody else say that? Anybody, is there somebody else that said that?
Jesus.
Yeah, interesting. What's good? I don't know if Jesus was referring back to that when he said that best, but it's true, one of those true statements. Okay, how about Deuteronomy 15:12?
If your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and serves you 6 years, then in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you send him away free from you, you shall not let him go away empty-handed. You shall supply him liberally from your flock, from your threshing floor, and from your winepress. For what the Lord has blessed you with, you shall give to him.
Okay, so now this is the concept of the bondservant. We see that referred to a lot, especially in the New Testament, that a Hebrew, when he's poor, he could indenture himself to another Hebrew and agree to serve them, for a period of time. But in the 7th year, it had to be erased and set free. And then not only did you have to let them go, you were supposed to give them a little cash and stuff to help sustain them. So God was serious about taking care of them. And how about Leviticus 1:25-1-7?
And the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. What grows of its own accord of your harvest you shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine. For it is a year of rest for the land. And the Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you. For you, your male and female servants, your hired man, and the stranger who dwells with you. For your livestock and the beasts that are in your land, all its produce shall be for food.
Wow. So, every 7 years, you get a year off. No planting, no harvesting. You're supposed to just let the land lie, and whatever the land produces, that's what you're going to eat. Think that took some faith? Yeah, that's a very strange concept. in all. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But so every 7th year, no planting, no harvesting. And God said, God promised, once again, if you obey me, you do what I ask, I'll bless you. There'll be so much abundance that for 2 years, you'll eat off the last harvest. Okay, and then there's this thing called the Jubilee. Let's look at that. At Leviticus 25, let's go back there, 25:11 through 17.
This 50th year will be a jubilee for you. During that year, you must not plant your fields or store away any of the crops that grow on their own, and don't gather the grapes from your unpruned vines. It will be a jubilee year for you, and you must keep it holy, that you may eat whatever the land produces on its own. In the year of jubilee, each of you may return to the land that belonged to your ancestors. When you make an agreement with your neighbor to buy or sell property, you must not take advantage of each other. When you buy land from your neighbor, the price you pay must be based on the number of years since the last jubilee. The seller must set the price by taking into account the number of years remaining until the next year of jubilee. The more years until the next jubilee, the higher the price. The fewer years, the lower the price. After all, the person selling the land is actually selling you a certain number of harvests. Show your fear of God by not taking advantage of each other. I am the Lord your God.
And now 23 and 24. Everybody have that one?
Yeah, I got that one. The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me. And in all the land of your possession you shall grant redemption of the land.
Yes, redemption of the land. That's this whole thing that we're going to get into later on in chapters 3 and 4 is going to revolve around this redemption of the land. But look at this. In Israel, you could sell your property to another Israelite, but in the Jubilee year, it came back to you. It came back to your family. And then God, also notice that God says, the land is mine. I'm just letting you use it. But your family land came back to you in the year of the Jubilee. Now there was also another thing in the year of Jubilee. Now he said, and we didn't go all into that, but you were supposed to count off 7 years of 7. So in the 49th year was going to be a Shemitah, no planting or harvesting. And so the next year, the 50th year, was a Jubilee. Also no planting or harvesting. So when you get to the Jubilee year, there's going to be 2 years where there's not going to be any planting or harvesting. And you're just going to have to trust God that for 3 years, you're going to have 3 years worth of food already. Think that took a lot of faith? And when the land was sold, the way you calculate it is that, if it's 40 years for the Jubilee, the price is higher. If it's 10 years for the Jubilee, the price is lower. So that's how they were supposed to, because they were actually selling the number of crops. Once again, we talked about that one of the big themes in this whole book is the land, getting back to this land. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about the sale of the land here as we proceed further. And there's some more stuff that Levites, if you sold your house in a walled city, you couldn't redeem it in the Jubilee. It didn't come back to you, but except for the Levites whose houses always came back to you. So, this Shemitah apparently was not observed for quite some time. But at least for 490 years, according to the Bible, they didn't do this. And actually God prophesied in Leviticus that they wouldn't. And so in Chronicles, and we're not going to read all this, but in Chronicles God said, you're going into exile for 70 years because for the past 490 years you have not done this, so I'm going to give the land its rest for 70 years. That's why the exile lasted for 70 years. Because they had not obeyed God. Okay.
That's also coincidentally 7 times, 490 years, is 7 times that period of time, right?
Yeah,
So it's
70 times
a count
7.
for every time they did it.
So, you know, the Israelites did not obey in this. In fact, you know, there's no biblical evidence that you see this anywhere that they actually did this. You don't even see it anywhere. And one of the reasons that I like to go through this history is that we don't really see this played out anywhere except maybe here in the book of Ruth. That's the only place you see a lot of this stuff. And by the way, has anybody been taught this before? Have y'all seen this? Are y'all anybody not aware of this? That haven't seen this before? Yeah. So, if an Israelite became poor and had to sell himself for his land, we have this concept of a kinsman redeemer. You know, this is one of the big themes in the books of Ruth. Kinsman redeemer. Okay, a close relative could buy back his land and restore it to the relative. Okay, if the debtor became prosperous, he could buy his own land back, but they would calculate it by the years of the Jubilee, or he could just wait until the Jubilee and the land would be returned to him. But if he had a good relative, an uncle who really loved you, he could buy the land back and do back to you. So, the kinsman redeemer had some obligations. It's called the goel. Okay, so let's take a look at the goel here. So who has Leviticus 25? 25.
I do. Those can't see me. Okay. If a fellow countryman of yours becomes so poor he has to sell part of his property, then his nearest kinsman is to come and buy back what his relative has sold. Or in case of a man who has no kinsman, but so recovers his means as to find sufficient for its redemption, then he shall calculate the years since its sale, and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it, and so return to his property.
Okay.
But if he has not found sufficient means to get it back for himself, then what he has sold shall remain in the hands of its purchaser until the year of Jubilee. But at the Jubilee it shall revert, that he may return to his property.
Okay, and look at verse 25. So if a fellow countryman is so poor he has to sell his property, then his nearest kinsman is to come and buy it back. So the nearest kinsman was actually obligated to buy the land back. Okay, and how about Leviticus 25:47?
If an alien or a temporary resident among you becomes rich and one of your countrymen becomes poor and sells himself to the alien living among you or to a member of the alien's clan, he retains the right of redemption after he has sold himself. One of his relatives may redeem him. An uncle or a cousin or any blood relative in his clan may redeem him, or if he prospers, he may redeem himself.
Let's just stop there because once again it's talking about the price related to the year of Jubilee. But the goel, the kinsman redeemer, if you had to sell yourself to a foreigner or whatever, then the goel was supposed to go and redeem this person. Okay, and then we've already talked about this a couple of times. Deuteronomy 25:5-10. That, you know, if one of the brothers dies, then the closest relative is supposed to come in, have a child in the brother's name, provide an heir. And then there's another thing that Goel was supposed to do. Who's got Numbers 35:16?
But if he strikes him with an iron implement so that he dies, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. And if he strikes him with a stone in the hand by which one could die, and he does die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Or if he strikes him with a wooden hand weapon by which one could die, and he does die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. The avenger of blood himself shall put the murderer to death when he meets him. He shall put him to death. If he pushes him out of hatred or while lying in wait, hurls something at him so that he dies, or in enmity he strikes him with his hand so that he dies, the one who struck him shall surely be put to death. He is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when he meets him.
Okay, so this blood avenger, back in those days, if somebody kills you, so, Matt, if I killed your son, Matthew, it's your job to kill me. How would you like that? Done. You're obligated to do that. Now, this word avenger can also be translated redeem. So you're to redeem.
Maybe it meant redeemed, man.
Oh. It can also be redeemed. So that's a pretty heavy thing. They had this system also. We won't go a lot into that, but they had what they called cities of refuge. Anybody remember that? So Matthew and I were working together, and somehow there was an accident, and a piece of equipment flew out of my hands and accidentally killed him. Then Matt's, going to come after me, but I can flee to the city of refuge and say it was an accident, and then there would be a little hearing, and they would, but I had to stay in the city of refuge for a period of time. So anyway, and the kinsman redeemer was also obligated to be a trustee. We won't go there. So in other words, if the father dies and the child is too young to manage the estate, and the kinsman redeemer is supposed to come in and manage the estate for him until he became of age. So this Goel, kinsman redeemer, is an important issue, and this is who Boaz is in this story. Boaz is the kinsman redeemer. Okay, and the kinsman redeemer once again is a type of Christ. Okay, so we talked about that. A relative became poor. We've been through this before. The relative was and had no heir. The relative was required to marry his brother's widow for the purpose of producing an heir. And a custom developed that connected the levirate duty to the right of redemption, and this allowed the land to remain in the possession of the family and prevented the family name from dying out. So this is what's going to play out here with Boaz and Ruth here. Okay. Let's just do this real quick since I've got this done. So Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. So let's see how this plays out in the New Testament. So Revelations 21,
1 through 5.
1 through 5.
And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he shall dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be among them. And he shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall no longer be any death. There shall no longer be any mourning, or crying, or pain. The first things have passed away. And he who sits on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. And he said, Write, for these words are faithful and true.
One day, Jesus is going to redeem this whole planet. And everything's going to be made new. That's exciting. That's exciting.
Can I just make one point here? It's kind of semantics, but a kinsman redeemer was not obligated to do anything. The first relative could choose to accept the kinsman redeemer or not. But once he accepted to be the kinsman redeemer, then he was obligated to do all of that.
Yes. Okay.
So he couldn't redeem the land and not do the rest or whatever. So I think that's important because Jesus chose to be our kinsman redeemer. He didn't have to do any of it. But once he made the decision to be the kinsman redeemer, he has to do all of it, so.
Right, okay, good point. And we see that, we're gonna see that in our story. Because Boaz could have opted out. And we'll get there, but he doesn't, so. Okay, and the kinsman redeemer is obligated to redeem the enslaved. Galatians 4:3, who's got that one?
I do 4:3-5. So also we, while we were children, were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world. But when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order that he might redeem those who were under the law, that he might receive the adoption as sons.
Okay, we were enslaved under the law, and Jesus has redeemed us. Redeemed, okay, how about provide an heir? Galatians 4:6-7. Can I not give that to somebody?
On the back of the card. It's on the back of the card.
Oh, I didn't look at that. Let me look. If I had it, nobody.
Because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Therefore you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. So Jesus has made us His heirs. Okay? Somebody have Romans 12?
Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord.
Okay. God has, through Jesus, has said, one day I'm going to take vengeance, which is a lot of what the book of Revelation is about. So we've got, Jesus promised to avenge us, and that's something we need to be very careful about, because this is something that God has reserved for Himself. If somebody harms us and we take vengeance, we are stealing something from God, and that puts us in a very, very bad place. We should not do that. And then obligated to be a trustee, John 4:2-3.
No.
In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also.
So Jesus has made this beautiful place for us, and He's holding it in trust for us until we get there. So Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. Okay. So, back to the story. Okay. So Naomi makes a match. Okay, so Naomi says that Ruth said, shall I not seek security for you that it may be well with you? Says, now as Boaz, our kinsman with whom made you work, behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. So Naomi's answered plan. And so she tells Ruth, she says, wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your best clothes, go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known until he has finished eating and drinking. And it shall be that when he lies down, you shall notice where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will tell you what you shall do. So, they're plotting against Boaz. They're laying a trap. And so, ladies, you know this routine. Wash, get anointed, put on something that smells good. You know, get your best clothes on. And all. You sneak up on these guys. And they know what to do when this happens. So we see a big change in Naomi in this chapter. Okay, she's taking initiative now. Instead of Ruth taking responsibility for her, she's taking responsibility for Ruth. She's making plans and she's giving instructions. So, I'm not going to go through all these verses, but these are some kind of New Testament verses that are on your sheet, you can look them up later, but wash and anoint best clothes. And Ruth says, okay, I'm going to do everything you said. So she went down to the threshing floor and she did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. So now we see that Ruth makes her good. Okay, the threshing time was a time of great joy and feasting. A lot of times it was done in the evening to take care of the breeze. You know, they would throw it up in the air, the chaff would fly away, and the seeds would fall down. And they would stay at the threshing floor to keep thieves from stealing the harvest, because this was the time of the judges. It was still a pretty wicked time in Israel. So Boaz, he's worked all day. He's gotten tired, hot and sweaty. He's had a nice meal, drank a little wine, goes down by the grain to guard it, and he falls asleep. And so Ruth sneaks up, comes along, uncovers his feet, and lays down. So in the middle of the night, Boaz wakes up and goes, "Whoa, what's happening here?" There's a woman, and he sees this woman lying at his feet. Now, obviously, it's pretty dark because he can't tell who she is. And so there's this thing about the garment. In Israel, their garments had a little decoration at the bottom of hem. They called it shul. And it was a symbol of their rank or authority. And we see this as a story where David, and Saul is chasing David, so David and his men are hiding in this cave. Saul comes in to relieve himself. David sneaks up and cuts off part of the edge of his garment. And Saul leaves, and then later on, David starts to feel guilty. And so why was David feeling guilty? And later on, he walks out of the cave and shows Saul what he did and said, "I could have killed you, but I didn't." But he was feeling guilty because that edge of the garment was a symbol of his rank or authority. So when he cut that off, he was assaulting Saul's authority as king. So that's why he felt guilty. And then we see this story in the New Testament with a woman with a hemorrhage. She had been to a lot of doctors and nobody was able to help her. So she goes to Jesus and she just wants to touch his garment. So she touches the hem of his garment, which is his symbol of authority. So what we see here, Ruth is asking Boaz to put the authority of his house over her. She's invoking her right under the laws of Israel for him to take her to be his wife. So Ruth is proposing here. Now I think this is interesting because I don't think Boaz would have. Because Boaz, being an older man and all, and wouldn't have thought it was his place to do this. So it was really up to Ruth.
Leave it to the women.
And Naomi puts her up to it. Naomi realizes this. Excuse me. So Ruth is proposing. And Boaz, first of all, doesn't recognize her. And she's answered, "I am Ruth, your maid." She says, "So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative." And Boaz kind of gets excited here, doesn't he? He says, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter, who has shown your last kindness to be better than the first, by not going after young men, whether poor or rich." Something's happening in my throat. So now we see Boaz gets energized. He starts to move toward matrimony. He says, "Now my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask. For all the people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence." So Boaz realizes who she is, and he has a great respect for her. So he says, "Now it's true, I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. So remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good. But if he does not wish to redeem you, I will. I will redeem you as the Lord lives. So lie down until morning." So what does this tell you?
He'd already thought about it.
He's thought about it. It's crossed his mind, and he's kind of gone through this in his mind. He's considered this possibility. So she lay at his feet until morning and arose before anybody could recognize her. He said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." So he's trying to protect her reputation. Because if somebody saw her there, they would make assumptions that things were going on which weren't. And he wanted to protect Ruth from that. And so he says, "Give me your sash." And he puts 6 measures of barley and sends her back to Naomi. So we see Boaz's kindness. So Boaz blesses Ruth. He accepts her, affirms her, admires her, gives her a promise that I will do this. He protects her, sending her home before anybody can know what was going on, and he provides for her by giving her food. So Ruth gets back home, and now how did it go? Tell me the whole story. It's like my wife with the 20 questions. I want to know the whole story. And so she shows her the barley and how Boaz said, "Don't go to your mother-in-law empty-handed." Then she said, "Wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest until he has settled it today." And then there's some verses, and I don't think we're going to have time to go through all these today, about waiting on the Lord. But so now we have to wait. We have to wait and see what God is going to do. And you can look up these verses later, but a lot of times in our life, especially in our culture, waiting is not something that we like to do. We're an instant gratification culture. If we go to the fast food restaurant and it takes more than 2 minutes to get our food, we're sitting there, right? We don't wait very well. So I think that's what.
I was gonna say, this waiting is like the waiting that we had to do between Good Friday and Sunday. That Saturday was the wait.
Yeah.
Had
So at this point, Ruth doesn't know what's going to happen to her. She doesn't know how there's another relative. And as you were pointing out, that Boaz has volunteered. He said, "I will do it, but I'm not the first in line." So I'm not sure exactly what the relationship was there. We don't know. Apparently it wasn't an uncle. If he had been an uncle, he would have been first in line. Brother would have been first, then the uncle, and then. So Boaz must have been some sort of a cousin, and the other was a closer cousin, is what I'm assuming. And we'll get into more of that next week. So we're going to have to wait to see what happens to Ruth. Now we're in that tension. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? So we'll see. Will we have a happy ending or not? So let's close this time to go. Heavenly Father, we again thank you for this book. We thank you that you have always had a heart for the poor. Yeah, and you've always had a plan to take care of those, and you've always commanded your followers to take care of the poor and the needy. And I pray that you'd help us not to forget that. And I also pray that you would give us patience, Lord, for sometimes you have promised us things that we know that you are going or want to do, but you're making us wait. And I pray that you give us the patience to wait and trust you. To know that one day, either on this side or the other side, you are going to fulfill all those promises and all those things that you are going to do for us. And we thank you for being our kinsman and redeemer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.